Since their inception, Chromebooks have been thought of as cheap computers, cheap laptops, just a browser, a cheap way to get something that can get you online. And while there are plenty of those affordable Chromebooks still available, one change we're seeing is the introduction of more mid-range, mid to upper range Chromebooks. And Google started this with the introduction of the Pixelbook. Now, the Pixel lines that came before it tried to start this precedent and never really caught on, but the Pixelbook seems to have started something that's changed manufacturers' ideas of what it means to build a Chromebook. And one of the devices that we're seeing kind of follow this new trend is this, the Dell Inspiron Chromebook 14. The MSRP on this is $599, and so I feel like that puts it kind of right in the upper mid-range of Chromebooks, because there's not a lot you can buy for $600 that's built as well as this thing, that brings all of the great flares that this device brings to the table. And so we want to take a deeper look at what makes the Dell Inspiron Chromebook 14 a really good contender in this space. Before we get started, this video is brought to you by NordVPN. They are the VPN of choice for tons of users, including Chromebook users. If you'd like to learn more, go to chromeunbox.com/NordVPN to get started today. So let's start off just like we do with most reviews and talk about the screen. This is a 16:9, so pretty standard display, 14 inches diagonal, but with pretty small bezels on 3 of the sides. And it's full HD, so 1920 by 1080. None of those specs stand out or make you think, oh wow, this is a unique experience, but it's just a really good panel. The brightness is really good, somewhere around 300 nits, viewing angles are great, it's an IPS display, and things just look really good. 1080p, I've long said, all the way up to 15.6 inches or so is gonna remain pretty sharp, and now that Chrome OS scales really well, it doesn't matter if you want to make things a little larger on the screen or a little bit smaller, everything's going to stay nice and sharp and look really, really great. So I have no complaints whatsoever about the screen. As I use this device as my main device for a few days and didn't use anything else but this, I never once did I think, oh man, I can't wait to get back to my Pixelbook display because this display is terrible, because I've done that before in certain circumstances. This was not one of those circumstances. This thing performed really, really well. Colors are really, really good. The blacks are nice and rich, and the bezels are small enough that it feels good. It feels modern, and the display is big enough if you're going to use it on its own at 14 inches. It's actually big enough to get a lot of work done on this display alone, and the horsepower, as we'll talk about in a second, is plenty if you want to push it to a secondary display. As we move on down to the keyboard and trackpad, I'd give them like a 7 out of 10. They're not the worst thing I've ever used. They're also not the best. So a lot of times I judge this stuff against the Pixelbook because Google put together a package there that is just great. The keyboard feels great and the trackpad feels great on the Pixelbook. And this device is okay. It's serviceable. The keyboard to me feels a little bit mushy. The travel on the keys is great, but the click on them leaves a lot to be desired. And so sometimes I would miss keystrokes, and you just can't tell when the click's not really good. So if you're in the market for just the best keyboard you could possibly get, this probably isn't going to be it. But it's backlit, and a lot of people get upset about non-backlit keyboards, especially when we approach $500 and $600 devices. This one's got backlighting, multiple stages, 4 stages. The trackpad, while not being glass, is pretty good. The click mechanism feels pretty good. It did, over time, so over the course of a full day maybe, tend to build up a little bit of oil on it, which tells me it's probably not etched glass. Sometimes it's just difficult to tell. I'm not exactly sure what material it's made out of, but it performs really well. So most of your gestures and all that kind of stuff, they work just fine. One thing I really do like about what Dell's done here is port selection. And so it's funny, we moved through a phase where everybody just wanted to do USB-C. So the Pixelbook only has USB-C, and sometimes that's a little bit of a hang up, and I've got to search for a dongle or some sort of adapter. The Samsung Chromebook Plus and Pro did the same thing, the HP Chromebook X2. So some of these newer devices, they want to keep things slim, and USB-C is great. I love USB-C. It's just sometimes I need an A port to actually plug something into. It doesn't happen a ton for me, but I know for certain users, that's a big deal, and having to carry a dongle around is annoying. So with this device, you get the addition of a USB-A with a USB-C on both sides that will do display out and charging on both sides. So whichever way you want to use it, if you're going to dock it into a keyboard and a monitor setup, it can work with that. You also have a micro SD card. You've got headphone microphone jack, which pretty much everything has. But you know, having an SD card, having a USB-A slot, it's just a nice port selection. I never really felt the need to go and get a bunch of dongles and figure out how I was going to hook stuff into this one. And while we're talking about ports, The speakers on this thing are actually really, really good. They are downward firing, and usually when I see speaker grills on the underside of a device, I automatically think, yeah, they phoned this one in. It's just, they're gonna be crappy speakers. But the Dell managed to pull off something pretty nice here. While the speakers don't actually direct themselves at your face, something like the Acer Chromebook 15, for instance, would do, they're really rich and really full and really nice sounding. I was really surprised by it and had to watch a few things and think, man, these are really good speakers, because there have been some devices where I would have figured, hey, this is going to have great speakers, and they've just been really mediocre or really full of mid-range and kind of muddy sounding. And these just aren't that. They sound really, really good. So like if you're watching, a video or something, are you going to watch feature-length movies on here and enjoy the speakers and Dolby surround sound? No, let's not be crazy. But as far as like watching a quick video or showing something to someone when you're holding the device, the speakers actually sound really good. Another thing I really like about what Dell is offering here is the stowable stylus. And the reason I like styluses, I don't know, you can let me know in the comments which one you think it is. But the reason I like devices with a stylus that can be put into the machine is that I don't ever have to worry about whether it's there or not. And I've talked about this before, but that can be really, really convenient. Now, it is weird. This one and the Acer Chromebook 13 both share the exact same place where they put it. So it's right up underneath the front, and you pull it out, and it's great when it's sitting here as a laptop. But when I actually have it folded up as a tablet, all of a sudden the spot where you get the stylus out, it's a little quirky. That's a small nag, but it's something to think about. Like if you're gonna use it in tablet mode a lot, that's probably something worth noting. But the stylus works really great. It's EMR, just like Samsung's offerings and Acer and probably multiple other people. It's EMR, so there's no need for a battery, and it's small, so it can stay inside the device, and it works like you'd expect it to. And while we're talking about styluses and convertibles and all that kind of stuff, one thing you need to know about the Dell is it's really heavy. Now, some people look at that as a bad thing and some people look at it as a good thing. I'm kind of on the fence, to be honest with you, because in the bad way, it's just flat out heavy. It's almost 4 pounds, and yeah, it's a 14-inch device, so it's gonna weigh a substantial amount. But this feels like it weighs extra, like they put an extra piece of lead in it or something. Like it just feels really heavy. But on the flip side, it feels substantial. And so there can be heavy, like clunky, junky heavy, or there can be just like substantial heavy. And we haven't really talked about the build yet of this device, and I wanted to hold it specifically for this because it is heavy, but it's really, really well built. It's really well put together, and I think that has something to do with Dell putting Inspiron on the device. Inspiron has been a brand that Dell has used for years. I know at least 10, 12, 14, heck, it may be even longer than that. I remember buying an Inspiron Windows PC. I mean, it's huge, big, thick monster of a device, but they were using the Inspiron branding back then. And so for them to actually put a Chromebook out that has that branding on it is important, because it's telling consumers, hey, we're bringing Chrome OS into the fold here. They have the XPS line. We haven't seen a Chromebook with XPS on it yet. That's their premium line. But they make Windows and Linux or Ubuntu versions of the XPS line. So maybe this is the first step, and then maybe making like a Dell XPS with Chrome OS on it or something like that. But it's important to note they're putting that branding on there that they've reserved only for Windows PCs up to this point, and now we have Chromebooks. And so I say all of that to say Dell knows how to put together a PC. They've done it for a long, long time. And so yeah, it's a little heavy, but it's made out of solid aluminum, and the thing feels like a tank. So if you're looking for something you like that, like I like a heavy device that feels substantial, and I know that I have it and it feels just super duper solid. And I'll share this with you guys. I actually dropped it off my chair a few days ago. It hit a wood floor. No worse for wear whatsoever. I mean, no dents, no scratches, no nothing. This thing's gonna hold up because it's built really, really well. And I think that is part of them bringing that Inspiron branding over to this particular Chromebook. So we've talked about all the exterior parts. So what's on the inside? Interestingly, Dell only offers one configuration of this one. And for some users, they're not gonna like this. For me, and having used it for a little bit of time now, I really like what they've put together here. So let's talk about what's inside here. So you have the Core i3, so it's an 8th gen Kaby Lake Core i3 8130U processor. So blah, blah, blah. What does all that mean? It actually just means that this is the fanned version, so kind of the desktop class version of this processor. And you see it in benchmarks. This thing gets a 96 on speedometer, which is pretty dang high. If you do speedometer 1.0, it gets like 140, which is actually off of what it registers, or 160, I'm sorry, off of the 140 that it registers. The thing is fast, and it's faster than my Core i5 7th gen Pixelbook. And it gets an octane score of 34,000 depending on when you run it. It's really, really, really fast. However, that processor, even though people would want, oh, I want an i5 or I want an i7, trust me, with Chrome OS, the i3 is plenty. This thing blazes. It's really, really fast. It's paired with 4 gigs of RAM. And some of you are going, nope, I'm out. I don't want that. And that's fine. It's not for everyone. And luckily for you, there's tons of other options. Just like we said at the beginning of this video, there are a bunch of devices in kind of this class that are hitting the market right now. So you've got some other options. But this one comes paired with 4 gigs of RAM, and that's the only option. And I'll be honest with you, I used to be in the 8 gigs of RAM camp. I use a Pixelbook all the time. It's got 8 gigs of RAM, so I just assume that's what I need. But using this and doing all of my work and multiple tabs and music players and messengers and Android apps and everything open, I really never ran into any issue. And so while I would like 8 gigs of RAM for future proofing, sure, I think in general, the way that Chrome OS is getting better and better at handling RAM is less and less of an issue. And the other thing that Dell did with this particular model is that they paired those specs with 128 gigs of internal storage. And yes, it's eMMC, and we can argue all day about whether or not you need SSD versus eMMC versus NVMe. If you don't know what any of those things mean, it doesn't really matter, because Chrome OS doesn't necessarily need super, super fast hard drive speeds. eMMC is actually fast enough when you're talking about using a Chromebook on Chrome OS. And so paired with 128 gigs of storage, you don't have to worry about SD card storage and all that stuff. You got plenty of room for all your stuff. The Core i3 blazes and is fast, and 4 gigs of RAM is enough to get by on. Like, I really didn't notice any issues here. And so they've just put together a really compelling package at $599. I think it's a good price for this device. This thing is just an easy recommendation. It checks so many boxes. And so hopefully we've helped you make a purchasing decision with this video and with all the stuff that we've talked about with this device, because it's great. It's easy to recommend. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe below. And until next time, we'll see you.